Man Up, a program dedicated to inspiring and helping men live lives of heroic virtue. And now, it's time to Man Up.
Welcome to Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio. We are broadcasting on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. I am Joe Stopulos. Today, I am joined by Father John Hotze and my friend Abe Manley to discuss Father Emil Kapaun. Emil Kapaun is a man from Wichita, Kansas. He's a priest. He's also up for sainthood and was recently named Venerable. So we're going to learn about his life and Father John Hotze, who is actually the head of his cause for canonization. So let's start in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our defense against the wickedness and the snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. In the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Father Emil Kapaun, my friend Abe Manley, 17-year-old here from the Diocese of Des Moines, got me onto. He said, "Hey, you got to have an episode on Father Kapaun." So I'm like, "Okay, I know a little bit about him. I've seen his name on some Facebook things or Twitter or whatever, but I've seen enough to know. Okay, here's a guy who was serving in the military. I didn't know which war, any of that stuff, and so anytime I'm doing an episode on a saint or anything like this, I dive into it, dive into his life a little bit, listen to podcasts, read Wikipedia articles, whatever it is." And Father Kapaun is a saint that we should all get to know. He's a saint that is heroic virtue par excellence, especially when it comes to masculinity. He's a man who gave his life for others. And interestingly enough, the momentum for his cause has really picked up in the last, call it, decade and a half, when he was actually posthumously given the Medal of Honor by Obama in, I think, 2013 or so. So in that area. And then as of literally 3 months ago, Pope Francis took him from servant of God to venerable. So a lot of action going on in the life of Father Kapaun. So on the other side of the break, we're going to have Father John Hotze, who is from the Wichita Diocese, who is literally the head of his canonization cause. So he'll be the perfect guy to join us to dive into the life of Father Kapaun. Stick around, and we'll be right back. My help comes from you. You're right here. Welcome back to Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio. I am joined today by Father John Hotze. He is the Episcopal Delegate for Father Emil Kapaun's cause for beatification and canonization. I'm also joined by my friend Abe Manley in studio to talk about Father Emil Kapaun. Father John, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here. So
I'm gonna start this whole thing off by saying let's just get the name thing out of the way. I did an episode. I'm gonna have a couple parallels. I did an episode a couple weeks ago on Saint Isaac Jogues, and I had to help people understand this can go either way. You can pronounce it a lot of different ways. Jogues. The Kapaun thing is way different, though. Capon and Kapaun aren't even close. So what are we going with? What are we going with?
Well, I think every place except in Wichita, he's Father Kapaun.
Okay, so if I'm in Wichita, I say Capon, or else I'll get in trouble.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly, and that comes from the high school that was named after him.
Okay.
And the story goes that in 1956, when the high school was dedicated, Cardinal Spellman, who was then the ordinariate of the military archdiocese, was in Wichita for the dedication of the high school, and he pronounced it Capon, and it stuck.
No way.
So,
That's ridiculous.
So in Wichita, it's Capon. And I talked to his brother Eugene, and I asked him once how it was supposed to be pronounced, and he said, well, it's really supposed to be pronounced Kapaun, but he said the way he looks at it, and as a matter of fact, he worked at the high school as it was being opened, and he said at first he tried to correct people on the pronunciation of the name, but he said it was already gone.
That's
so he
amazing.
Said that he gave up on it, but he said the way he looked at it is that his brother Emil knew who we were talking about. God knew who we were talking about, and he said, "Who else matters?"
That is hilarious. Well, yeah, so it's amazing how different those two names are, but whatever. Whichever one works,
Yep.
I'll stick with Kapaun because I'm not currently in Wichita, but you are, so you might get in trouble. All right, so you are – there's a few things I want to do with this. So my friend Abe here, Abe was the one who told me about this. He goes, hey, this Father Kapaun's the man. You should talk about him on your show and all this stuff. And so I've now kind of gotten into the life of Father Kapaun. And what I'm hoping you can do is, first off, maybe give us a sketch of his life. Like, why should people care about him? Who is he? And then also, and you could choose which way you want to do this, how were you first introduced to him? So, like, give us a sketch or how you were, because you're obviously a very important piece into this puzzle of Father Kapaun, but maybe give us a sketch of his life and kind of how you got introduced to him.
Well, I got introduced to him in a rather odd way. My mother had a devotion to military chaplains, and it stemmed back to my father being in World War II. And then I had a couple brothers that were in the military also, one in the Air Force and one in the Army. So she always had this devotion to chaplains. And growing up, a family with 9 kids, and growing up in our house, we had 1.5 bathrooms in our house, so you can imagine they were the popular places. But my mom had taken a prayer to Father Kapaun and also a prayer to St. Jude, and she had taped them both up on the bathroom mirror. So every time we were there in the bathroom, we were either looking at the prayer for Father Kapaun or the prayer to St. Jude, I guess depending on whether or not we were a hopeless cause that day or not. That's how I got known or introduced to Father Kapaun. My brothers went to Chaplain Kapaun Memorial High School, so I knew of him, and I knew of his cause for sainthood, or people talked about his cause for sainthood throughout my life.
Yeah, but this is that. I mean, we're talking about years ago now, because I mean, in my world, right? So I'm here in Iowa. I can maybe represent the rest of the United States. Like, this is clearly a Wichita-centric thing, right? So people are in the Wichita diocese know about this, but I don't know how widespread is this out. Maybe in the military circles too. It sounds like it's pretty widespread.
Well, yes and no, because the people that need to be congratulated or to be thanked for their promoting Father Kapaun are his fellow POWs that were released from the prisoner war camp at the end of the Korean War. Because the moment that they got out of the POW camps, they started telling Father Kapaun's story. And it was their work back in the 1950s that really got all of this started. Certainly he was known as a priest of the Diocese of Wichita, but really he only served in the Diocese of Wichita as a priest for a few years before he went into the military. So even people here in the diocese were not that familiar with him, because he spent as much of his time in the military as he did here in the Diocese of Wichita.
What's interesting on that note is that from a timeline perspective, we're talking about he served a little bit in World War II, but then the bulk of it is the Korean War, and the POWs, right, to your point, that have taken his cause up first. I mean, I don't know, maybe it was concurrently, but the canonization piece of this, but also the Medal of Honor piece of this. Those people, you'll know the timeline better than I, but let's say he was there for 7 months, but it was like another 2 years these people were there. And to your point, they came out and they wanted to tell everyone about Father Kapaun. It's like, he's been dead for 2 years at this, but they've been held for 2 more years. And his memory, right, it was obviously in them the whole time. And then when they got out, they wanted to tell everyone about it. But again, that was 2 years of dwelling on this in these POW camps.
Right, exactly. And I think the reason behind it, and it's all kind of fortuitous, and I think you can see God's hand in all of this, and letting us know that things happen in God's time, is Father Kapaun was known by all of the men in the POW camp as a man of hope. And this year, with Pope Francis having this be a Jubilee year as we being pilgrims of hope, I thought was fortuitous that Father Kapaun was named venerable during this year of the Jubilee of hope. So like I say, I think if you look at the bigger picture, you can see God's hand working through this. And I am convinced, and other people that have worked on his cause are convinced, that all of this is in God's time.
Yeah,
we place our trust in God. Yeah.
I was going to say, it's beautiful because you look at also the way it's gone through on the secular side with the United States and him getting the Medal of Honor. Like, all the timing of all this stuff is kind of just there's a lot of momentum there. And one of the things that I think about when I look at these canonizations, I'm a big Pier Giorgio Frassati person. And, he's obviously going to be named a saint here shortly. And I've been following this for a while, and it is great when it's this grassroots thing that's been over years and years and years and years and years of growing and growing and growing, devotions growing to him, that's when really, that's when you can see the fruit of someone like a Father Kapaun. And so I want to, if we can, just real quick, what makes him the saintly person? What to you? Because I'm assuming a lot of our listeners are like me who never heard of this guy before. If they have, it's very small amounts. Maybe what are the top 2 or 3 things he did that would bring us, especially as men living today, to inspire us to live like Father Kapaun?
I think the thing that has always amazed me about Father Kapaun is that he was able to use the gifts that he was given in service to others. And when you look at it from a human point of view, he was given next to nothing. I mean, he was born in 1916, grew up in Kansas on a Kansas farm, the middle of the state, kind of the middle of nowhere. And when you think of him living through the Depression, living through the Dust Bowl days, the worst time in the history probably of the farming or agriculture in the United States. And so he literally had nothing, and he was able to use that in service to others. And in using that in service to others, he was able to instill hope even in people here in Kansas. But then when he was in the military, he was able to instill hope in his fellow veterans and in his fellow POWs when he was put in the prisoner war camp. And he did that by making sure everybody knew that their life had value. In the POW camp especially, they tell us that it was very easy for these men to commit suicide. If they would give up, the only thing they had to do to commit suicide was they were all infested with lice. And they said that the lice, one of the doctors that was there in the POW camp explained, he said, all they had to do to commit suicide was to quit picking the lice off of their body. Oh, and he said what would happen is, he said these lice would bite them and take out a drop of blood. But he said there were so many of them. He said if they had stopped picking the lice off of their body for 3 days, he said that they were dead. He said there was nothing that he or any of the other doctors could do to save them. But what Father Kapaun did was to convince these men that their lives had value, that if they gave up, then what it meant was that maybe their neighbor, the person that was in that hut with them, was going to die also, because maybe that person needed them to live. And he said it was through letting these men know that it was through their actions that they could save a life. Then the communists, the North Korean communists and the Chinese communists, wanted to break their spirit. So they did everything they could to convince these soldiers, especially the enlisted men, the young men, the ones that were in their late teens or early 20s, to convince them that nobody cared about them, that their families didn't care about them anymore, that their country didn't care about them anymore, that they were there in that prisoner war camp and nobody cared about them, nobody even knew of them. Well, Father Kapaun combated that by letting them know, no, that isn't the case, that your families still love you, and to help them to remember that, he would always talk to them and convince them that what they needed to do was think about what's going to happen when they get home again.
I just finished a 2-part episode on man's search for meaning, and that, from Viktor Frankl, and that what you're describing there is essentially what he was writing about, is helping people find meaning in their life even through suffering, right? So if you can find meaning in that suffering, and that's essentially what he did. Now, that's very specific to the POW camp itself, but if you look prior to that, right, when I looked at this when I was first introduced to him, I'm reading about him, many people are probably familiar with the movie Hacksaw Ridge and what Desmond Dawes had done there, and it's like he was doing that same kind of thing. He was running, into battle to save people's lives with no care for his own life, and he was doing it on the regular. And so there is a lot of these kind of parallels to Hacksaw Ridge before the POW camp. So I mean, I see his life in two different shades of how he was being heroic. One was on the actual battlefield, and then one was in the POW camp. And there are different types of heroism. One is the physical running into danger, and the other one is this spiritual father to the atheists, the agnostics, the Jews, the Christians, everyone within the POW camps. And everything I've read and heard, and this is, again, to your point, this is almost all of this is firsthand information from the POWs, is that the amount of lives he's saved is probably in the hundreds, just because of the work he was doing. It's a guy who is very heroic and truly gave his life for others. I mean, everything he did was to give. I mean, from joining the military in the first place as a chaplain, and then obviously choosing to go into Korea after he'd done World War II, because at this point he was. It's funny. My grandfather was 27 when he was a captain in World War II, and he was the old guy, right? All the other guys were 22, 21. At 27, and Father Kapaun, I think, was in his 30s. You have to correct me if I'm wrong. I think he was in his 30s,
right?
In Korea, so he was like this guy everyone was looking up to as he's running into the battlefield and giving people hope. So I think there's a lot we can, and I think I'm obviously encouraging people to go out and learn about him more, because this is a guy who everything you read about him is like how he didn't sleep. All he did was just serve people all day long. At least that's what I'm hearing.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. One of the people that I was fortunate to meet in this process was a man named Phil O'Brien, who worked for the Department of Defense. And it was his job to try to name all of those that died in prison camp number 5 in Korea. And he wasn't a Catholic. But the first meeting that I had with him, he told me that he was convinced that Father Kapaun was a Catholic, just because of the stories that he heard of Father Kapaun there in the POW camp, and he too said that there were countless lives that he saved. I mean, hundreds of men that he saved through his actions. But he told me, or he said, he was convinced that on the day that he was captured, Father Kapaun had come to the conclusion that he was not going to be able to make it home alive, but that he decided that since he knew that was going to be in God's hands, and that was all right, because no place better for it to be. So knowing that he wasn't going to come home, he was able to act fearlessly. And it was because of knowing that when he died was in God's hands, he decided that he could help as many people as he possibly could, which meant that he could go out into the battlefield when they were being fired upon, when the snipers' bullets were going over his head, so he could go out there and to be with the men where he was needed, that he could go out and pull the wounded off and pull the wounded back to safety, because his own death was in God's hands. And so this Phil O'Brien said that he was convinced that it was on that day of his capture that he had made this decision that in the POW camp he was going to help as many people as he could, even going against the rules and the orders. And I agree with him. But I told him, I said, with Father Kapaun, I said, the thing of it is you can't say that it was on that day that he was captured. Because with Father Kapaun, and the reason why we are looking at him for his sainthood, is because if you look back in his life, he said, who can say that wasn't Father Kapaun on the day that he decided to go to the seminary? Or who's to say that it wasn't Father Kapaun as he was there in his school in Pilsen, helping out his classmates with their own studies? Or who could say that wasn't Father Kapaun when he was at home on the farm, helping out his parents live through or collecting eggs or tending the chickens or the gardens so that they could have enough money to live through the Depression? But it was Father Kapaun who had decided in his childhood that he was going to do everything that he could to help others. And that is how he lived his life, and that's why we're looking at him for sainthood.
I want to get to that. I want to get to the sainthood piece in a second, because I don't get the opportunity to interview people who are on your side of the your side of the wall doing this. Okay. But real quick, I do want to touch on this. It's interesting. I just did this episode on St. Isaac Jogues, and to your point, like, was it a decision? Like, which of the many decisions in his life to give up his life? Was it the actual moment at the end? Or was it all those other decisions throughout his life where he just knew he was giving his life for other people? I think it's interesting to me that I'm going through both these guys at the same time, and their stories are very parallel in that they just served others. their entire life was service to others.
Exactly.
And they lost their lives for it. And they both knew they were going to lose their life for it. I mean, both these guys knew this is a very real chance of doing it. So anyway, it's funny for me to have both of these things going on kind of in my head at the same time because there are a lot of parallels. So we have about 3 minutes left. I want to, if you could just quickly, you are, this is an interesting thing. You are on the front lines of this. And by the way, you're moving through. He was just named Venerable in February of this year by Pope Francis. So he went from servant of God to Venerable this year. What is it like? Just give us a brief sketch of what it's like to be you right now. This is very exciting.
Yes, it is very exciting. And I think the other interesting part about it, and I always encourage people to pray for Father Kapaun's intercession, we have a number of alleged miracles that we are waiting for that so that they can be reviewed over in Rome. In Rome, they work it, and they'll only look at one at a time. And we have all the paperwork over there for one of the alleged miracles. But I encourage people to pray for Father Kapaun's intercession. I always say that we need to pray for his intercession to keep him busy, that we don't want him slacking off up there in heaven. But I think it's important that people realize that him, as a man of hope, can instill that same hope in us. And where better can we place our hope than in trusting in God and asking Father Kapaun's intercession so that we might be able to have that same trust in God that he had, exemplifying his faith throughout his life, from a small child until he gave his life there in the POW camp when he was 35 years old. No greater thing could be said about us if we had that same hope that Father Kapaun had, and were able to instill that hope in others as he did. So, and he did it with, like I say, he did it with nothing. We can use whatever we've been given by God, any gifts that we've been given by God in service to others. We can be good stewards of those gifts that we've been given. No reason behind it. Father Kapaun, a poor farm boy from Kansas, can do it. Any of us can do it also.
Well, that's beautiful. So I want to just real quick say thank you for your work on this. Obviously, you're there promoting his cause, and you're doing it across, obviously, the Wichita Diocese and around the world. And it's beautiful because, as I've now mentioned many times in the last few weeks, it feels like on this show, when we have the examples of these great saints, and one of the cool things about Father Kapaun is he's not Thomas Aquinas, right? He does not. Anyone can be a Father Kapaun. It takes fortitude, it takes hard work, it takes dedication to serving others, and that's something that all of us can. He's a very attainable saint in that he just did all the things necessary. The hard work, the grit, that's what it was. It wasn't he had this theological mind that no one could attain to, or he could, any of these types of things. He was a normal guy who lived a heroic life. So with that, we do have to head to a break, and I want to say thank you so much for joining us today for this time, and we will continue to pray for Father Kapaun, and we will ask for his intercession because he could be one of these great American saints here soon.
That's great. I appreciate that. Thank you for having me on.
Awesome. Thanks, Father John. We're going to head to a short break, and we will be right back.
My help comes from you.
And welcome back to Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio. As I mentioned, I am joined here by Abe Manley. Abe, welcome officially. You can say something now here.
Hello.
Hello, Abe. So Abe was on the call with us with Father John, and he's the one who introduced me to the idea of Father Kapaun, and I thought I'd take a quick second here. As you are so, obviously, Father Kapaun's made an impact in your own life. What is it about him that stirred something in you to say, hey, Joe, you got to have this guy in your show?
Yeah, Father Hotze mentioned how attainable this level of sainthood is, and I find that really attractive in a role model. Like, he is just a guy from the Midwest living this call to manliness, to holiness, and really, he's a true patriot also. We don't really have very many American saints or those about to become saints who kind of demonstrate for us that this life of patriotism and serving one's country is 100% compatible with a life of heroic virtue. And
well, I mean, Father Thomas Aquinas would say that patriotism is a sub-virtue of justice, right? So we actually owe a duty to our country, and he takes it to the extreme, right? Where
Absolutely.
He actually gives his life in service of others. I mean, and many people obviously do, and that's why he gets the Medal of Honor. That's one of the interesting things that, I'm taking your time here. The Medal of Honor, you should just read about his Medal of Honor. It's very much Hacksaw Ridge, right? The Medal of Honor is less for the POW stuff than it is for his on the field. I mean, that's really why you got it.
Right. There's, Father Kapaun, like, on the battlefield, literally going into enemy fire to rescue wounded men and even to retrieve the bodies of fallen men so they could have a burial. One story that I really like from Father Kapaun's life is he was helping the wounded on the battlefield, and he got so close to being shot in his head that he was smoking a pipe at the time, and the pipe was literally shot out of his mouth. And if you can you can look up later, there's this great image of he's holding up this broken pipe, and he's just got this huge smile on his face. Like, you can tell he's just so full of joy to be living this.
So if we could somehow get Chesterton in on this, so we get Chesterton, Kapaun, and Pier Giorgio, we can like start a pipe shop. And that would be those three guys.
Yeah, I know he was able to keep his pipe when he was taken prisoner, and he had a little bit of tobacco left, and he would ration it out and let all the other guys in the prisoner of war camp kind of have like one puff every day or so.
I think the more you studied him, the more I've gotten to know him. Everything he did was about service to others, and that's really, I mean, again, to your point, it's attainable sainthood, but it's hard because he did it every day, all day. So, Abe, thanks for the suggestion. I know I personally have gained a lot just from the dive I've done in his life. I'd encourage our listeners as well to learn more about him. There's a lot of great books, and all the books are basically firsthand information from these other POWs. So thank you for joining me today on Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio. I am Joe Stopulos. It's time to man up.
Man Up, inspiring men to live out their call to holiness.